So do you remember that epidemic of posters that started showing up a few years ago that were titled, "All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten"? Do you remember those? Yeah, they were these lovely sort of primary color type posters based on a little essay by Robert Fulghum of the same name, where he sort of set out this idea that the things that we most need to know in the world today are the things that we learned back in kindergarten. And if we sort of remember those and bring them forward, just imagine how much better the world would be. And so the posters started showing up as a way for us to remember and reflect on. And they were sort of the things that we know and that we learned, like share everything, play fair, don't eat the glue. Okay, I may or may not have added that one, but I like it. Flush. Warm cookies and cold milk are good for you. And my personal favorite, take a nap every afternoon. All I really need to know I learned in kindergarten. It was this way of reflecting about those things that we learned back when and thinking about bringing them back to us now and how much better the world would be now. Sort of letting us sort of see the world again through kindergarten eyes. Sort of this wisdom that we've had all along. And I was thinking about those posters because this gospel today from Luke is one of those that, if we're not really careful with it, sounds like it belongs on a kindergarten poster. If we're not really careful with this story, it sounds like one of those morality stories that we might hear in kindergarten that boils down to something that would fit on that poster that says, "Say thank you." Which, if you've ever been a parent of a kindergartner, if you've ever been around a kindergartner, if you've ever been a kindergartner, you know is not all that easy of a lesson. It's something that takes us a long time. We have to be reminded. We have to learn it. It takes us a while, but it is also that important that we need to be reminded. Because that's one of the treasures we have as followers of Jesus. We know that everything we have and everything we are isn't actually ours. Everything we have and everything we are gifts from God. They belong to God who has entrusted them to us. And our task as followers of Jesus is to remember that, to care for these things in God's name. And being grateful, being thankful, stopping to say thanks really is that powerful. It is one of the best and only ways for us to remember that and be shaped by it. And it changes us to stop and remember and say thank you to God for everything, because it's all His, really will change who we are. So that phrase feels important, and it feels like it belongs on that poster. And this story feels like it can boil down to just that simple phrase, say thank you. And it sounds like this is a story that belongs in kindergarten. Except, when we look around us, being in kindergarten is not that easy of a thing. Being a kid, no matter how we think we remember it or we wish it was, is kind of a scary time. I read a story this week, an article about a little girl, 7 years old, in Pennsylvania, who woke herself up, got herself breakfast, got herself dressed, filled her backpack, got herself on the school bus, and went to school, went through the day. And it was only on her way home, on the bus on the way home, that she happened to mention to the bus driver that morning she was not able to wake up her parents. She tried, and they just wouldn't wake up. Thanks be to God, the bus driver knew to do something with that. Because when the police came to check, they found her parents, ages 26 and 25, dead of a suspected overdose. And in the house were the other 3 kids, ages 5, 3, and about 9 or 10 months. Being a kindergartner, being a child, is not as rosy as maybe we would want to imagine it, is it? Or think about some of the other things that have been in the news this week. Maybe you've seen the pictures out of Aleppo, that great city in Syria, which is under constant bombardment. Pictures of children being pulled from rubble, their bodies pulled from the rubble. Think about what's happening in Haiti even today. Now, Haiti is an island. Throughout the Caribbean, Hurricane Matthew came through and was terrible, but Haiti was still reeling from the earthquake a number of years ago. Over 500 dead, and it's going to be much higher because they can't even get to most of Haiti to find out. And those are children there in the midst. Or, if you want to stay closer to home, this very night, there are children in Valparaiso who will go to bed tonight hungry because it is a weekend and they don't have access to the food provided to them by the schools. Being a child, no matter how we might imagine it, in this world is and has always been a scary thing. And so no matter what this world wants us to believe about or what passes for wisdom, and no matter what comes before us as a philosophy to follow, we don't need a rose-colored philosophy because we don't live in a rose-colored world. We don't need a kindergarten gospel because we don't live in a kindergarten world. What we need, what we are desperate for, is a God who will come into the middle of real life. We need a God who will get down into the dirt and into the muck of real life. We need a God that will be in the midst of things where we would never expect him to be. We need a God who's going to get into life with us. And friends, that's why I'm a Christian. That's exactly why I follow Jesus. Because Jesus is God down in real life with us, showing up in places that he ought not to be. Just look at what he did today in this gospel. Right? It says, and starts off that Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem, that great city. He's on his way to the cross. And that cross is that when he stretched out his arms for all and showed us once and for all that God's reach and God's mercy will stretch beyond every barrier we try to set up. That God's reach, love, and mercy will reach even beyond death. And nothing we try to throw up to hold him off is going to work. Jesus is on his way to the cross, and today, as he's on that trip, he's out in the borderlands. And I don't know why he's here, because he doesn't belong here. It says he's in that area between Galilee, where the good old Jewish boys, like the disciples and Jesus, are from, and Samaria. And you remember from stories like the Good Samaritan and other places that Jews and Samaritans did not get along very well. Think Bears fans and Packer fans. Or maybe think Democrats and Republicans. Or maybe think Americans and immigrants. Which is funny, isn't it? Because think about where we sit. Unless we've got Potawatomi blood, we're all immigrants, right? So Jesus is out here between these areas, and I don't know why. He doesn't belong here. He's not supposed to be out here. He's out where we would never expect him to be, and while he's out here in this borderland, he gets accosted by a gang. Now, this is a dangerous gang. This group of folks are so dangerous that people will go out of their way to cross to the other side of the street so they don't have to come near them. This gang is so deadly that people shoo them out of the cities and they have to live outside because nobody wants them around. This gang of people is so dangerous that being pushed out in the wilderness, apparently they've had to form their own community because there's 10 of them. 10 leprous men that come up and accost Jesus. And keeping their distance, which is what they were taught they're supposed to do because they don't belong in polite society, they holler, "Jesus, Master, save us. Have mercy." And did you catch it? Luke says, and Jesus sees them. There is nothing Luke could say that is more radical or dangerous than that. Jesus sees them. Because so often we don't, do we? So often we have trouble seeing beyond the categories that we are taught to put each other in. That sort of initial reaction that lets us know who we're supposed to be afraid of, who someone is. I worked for a number of years taking care of a man who lived in a wheelchair, and I tell you, it is hard for people to see beyond that initial category of cripple, a black man, a Muslim. We are taught to put people in boxes because then we can know who we are supposed to be afraid of. And as you and I both know, people who are afraid are easily controlled. In fact, it's in our language too. The Greek that's behind this describes them as 10 leprous men. But our translation, which sort of was written so that it rolls off our tongue more comfortably, says 10 lepers. Puts them in a box and says that they are nothing more than lepers. Instead of 10 men who have leprosy, Jesus sees them as men who have leprosy beyond the categories. Jesus sees us. Jesus sees beyond every barrier that we try to put up. And so Jesus sends them to the priest. He says, go and rejoin society. Go back to ordinary life. And as they are going, something happens and their skin is cleared. One of them notices what has happened, realizes who did it, and turns back. Now, he's a Samaritan, so he really probably, I wonder if he would have been welcome in the temple anyway. But for this man, going back to ordinary life is not going to be enough. Oh, no. Going back to the world the way it is, that's never going to be enough. When you have experienced the grace and mercy of God and discovered that God is real and His reign, His kingdom is in our midst, he comes back and falls at Jesus' feet because he has learned that's the best place to give thanks to God, is falling at the feet of Jesus. He has realized and learned that when he sees Jesus, he sees the heart of God. He comes to know the mercy and love of God, which reaches beyond every barrier, even the barrier of leprous skin. And once he has experienced that grace and mercy, he comes back and falls at Jesus' feet and thanks him. Thanks him. For he has come to know God's love that reaches beyond every border. And coming to know Jesus saves him. Ordinary life is not going to be enough, and so Jesus says to him, go on your way. Your faith has saved you. It really is that powerful, isn't it? Coming to know who we are and whose we are. Stopping, remembering, being grateful and thanking. It really does change who we are because it teaches us who we are not. And in knowing who we are not, we're taught how much we matter to the God of the universe. Saying thank you, falling at the feet of Jesus shapes us, forms us. Coming to know God's grace and His love that is for you, as it's shown on the cross, that love that will reach beyond every barrier, even death for you. Encountering that heart of God in Jesus, it is that powerful. It changes us and shapes us. And that's why together we fall at the feet of Jesus. That's why together we say, thanks be to God. That's why together we worship and follow Jesus wherever he's going, even out into the borderlands where he doesn't belong. It is that powerful to say thank you. And so, falling at the feet of Jesus, we are the ones who hear him say, go on your way. Your faith has saved you.